Fleet Commander Vrixenal settled into his chair at the head of the massive observation chamber. Around him sat the highest-ranking military officers of the Galactic Coalition. Representatives from 17 different species had gathered for this emergency session. The reason for their meeting floated on the holographic display before them. Earth, the small blue world that had recently made contact with the greater galaxy. Admiral Vezok of the Kryn Dominion clicked his mandibles impatiently. His species had conquered dozens of worlds through brutal efficiency. They did not understand why this meeting was necessary. Humans were a young species. Their technology was inferior. Their military forces were small. What possible threat could they pose to the combined might of the Coalition? High Strategist Mora of the Velith Collective leaned forward with all four of her eyes focused on the display. She had been the first to suggest this gathering after her intelligence operatives had recovered human military documents. What she had found disturbed her greatly, not because of weapons or tactics, but because of something far more unexpected. "I call this session to order," Vrixenal announced. His deep voice echoed through the chamber. "We are here to review the combat doctrine of the species known as humans. High Strategist Mora will present her findings." Mora rose from her seat and moved toward the central display. She waved one of her thin arms, and the hologram changed. It now showed dense text translated into the common galactic language. Legal documents, rules, guidelines. What you see before you are the laws of armed conflict as practiced by human military forces, Mora began. "I have spent considerable time studying these documents. I must confess that I did not believe them at first. I assumed they were propaganda meant to deceive us." Admiral Vezok made a dismissive sound. "All species claim to fight with honor. It means nothing." "That was my initial thought as well," Mora agreed. "So I dug deeper. I analyzed their historical records. I watched countless hours of their actual combat footage. I studied their military training programs. What I discovered was remarkable. These are not merely words on a document. Humans actually follow these rules, even when it cost them victory." The chamber grew quiet. Several officers exchanged confused glances. The concept of sacrificing victory for any reason was foreign to most species present. Mora changed the display again. "Let me show you an example. This is footage from a human conflict that occurred approximately 40 of their years ago. Watch carefully." The hologram showed a human military unit moving through an urban area. Enemy fighters were visible in the windows of nearby buildings. The human soldiers could have easily destroyed those buildings with heavy weapons. This would have eliminated the threat immediately. Instead, they moved forward on foot. They engaged enemies with precise weapons fire. Several human soldiers were injured in the process. "Why did they not simply destroy the structures?" asked Commander Zilith of the Moravian Empire. "They had the firepower. It would have been more efficient, because there were civilians inside those buildings," Mora explained. "Non-combatants, people who were not fighting. Human military doctrine strictly prohibits the deliberate targeting of civilians. They chose to accept casualties among their own soldiers rather than harm innocent people." Silence filled the chamber again. This time, it lasted longer. Admiral Vezok broke the quiet with harsh laughter. "Foolishness. In war you do whatever is necessary to win. Civilians are acceptable losses. Every species understands this." "Do they?" Mora asked. She changed the display once more. "Let me show you their training." Human soldiers spend significant time learning to identify threats. They are taught to exercise something called proportional response. This means they only use the amount of force necessary to neutralize a threat. Nothing more. The display showed human soldiers in training exercises. Instructors were evaluating their decisions. One soldier was being reprimanded. He had fired at a target that was holding what appeared to be a weapon, but it was actually a tool. The soldier was told he would have killed an innocent worker. "They punish their soldiers for making mistakes like this," Mora continued. They conduct investigations when civilians are harmed. Their commanders can face legal consequences if they order attacks that needlessly endanger non-combatants. Commander Zeleth shook his head in disbelief. This must be exaggeration. No military can function with such restrictions. War is chaos. Mistakes happen. You cannot expect soldiers to hesitate before every shot. Mora pulled up another set of documents. These are human military courts-martial. Records of their own soldiers being prosecuted for violations. Soldiers who killed civilians without justification were imprisoned. Some for many years. Their own people demand accountability. Fleet Commander Vrixenal spoke up for the first time since the presentation began. High strategist, I understand this is interesting from a cultural perspective. But what is the military significance? Surely, these restrictions make their forces weaker. Mora considered the question carefully before answering. That is what I expected to find, Commander. I was wrong. Their doctrine of protecting civilians has made them more effective warriors. Not less. She brought up tactical analyses on the display. Maps showed human military operations across decades of their history. Statistics flowed alongside the images. When humans occupy territory, the local population often cooperates with them. Because humans are known for protecting civilians, people trust them. They provide intelligence. They report enemy movements. They offer supplies and shelter. This gives human forces enormous advantages. The officers began to understand. Admiral Lizok's expression had changed from amusement to concern. Compare this to our own methods, Mora continued. When Kryn forces occupy a world, the population resists constantly. Every civilian is a potential enemy. Resources must be dedicated to suppression. Information is difficult to obtain because no one trusts occupiers who massacre innocents. Admiral Lizok's mandibles clicked angrily, but he did not interrupt. There is more, Mora said. Human soldiers fight harder because they believe in what they are doing. They see themselves as protectors. Their morale remains high even in difficult situations. They believe their cause is just. This psychological factor should not be underestimated. She showed footage of human soldiers distributing food and medical supplies to civilians in war zones. The same soldiers who had been fighting hours earlier were now helping wounded children, building shelters, repairing infrastructure. They call this winning hearts and minds, Mora explained. They understand that military victory is only temporary. Lasting peace requires the cooperation of populations. You cannot achieve this through fear and brutality alone. Fleet Commander Vrixenal leaned back in his chair. He was beginning to see humans in a new light. Not as weak creatures limited by foolish morality, but as clever strategists who had discovered something other species had missed. What about when they face enemies who do not follow these rules? Asked a voice from the back of the chamber. It was Observer Krell from the neutral territories. Surely they cannot compete against forces willing to do anything to win? Mora nodded. An excellent question. I studied this extensively. Humans have faced many enemies who targeted civilians deliberately. Terrorists, extremist groups, brutal regimes. In almost every case, the humans eventually prevailed. She displayed more historical records. Long conflicts that seemed hopeless at first. Enemies that used every cruel tactic imaginable. Yet somehow, the humans won. Their discipline gives them advantages that brutality cannot match, Mora explained. Enemies who harm civilians create hatred. This hatred generates endless new fighters willing to oppose them. But forces that protect civilians earn gratitude. People want them to succeed. The math eventually favors those who show restraint. Admiral Lizok finally spoke again. His tone was different now, thoughtful rather than dismissive. You are suggesting that our methods are flawed, that the way we have waged war for thousands of years is inferior to human doctrine. Mora met his gaze without flinching. I am suggesting that we should study their approach carefully. We have always believed that mercy is weakness, that compassion has no place on the battlefield. Humans prove that this is not true. Their military is strong precisely because it is restrained. The chamber erupted in heated discussion. Officers argued among themselves. Some refused to accept what they had heard. Others were already reconsidering their entire understanding of warfare. Fleet Commander Vrixenal raised a hand for silence. Slowly, the noise died down. "I want to share one final observation," Mora said. "Human soldiers are trained to disobey illegal orders. If a commander tells them to harm civilians, they are taught to refuse. They place moral principles above military hierarchy." This revelation shocked the assembled officers more than anything else. In most galactic militaries, disobeying orders meant death. The idea of common soldiers questioning their superiors was unthinkable. How do they maintain discipline? Commander Zeleth asked. "They maintain discipline through shared values," Mora answered. "Their soldiers believe in what they fight for. They do not need the threat of execution to follow orders. They obey because they trust their leaders, because they know their commanders will not ask them to commit atrocities." Fleet Commander Vrixenal stood up. His towering form cast a shadow across the display. "I think we have learned something important today. Humans are not weak. They are not naive. They have developed a military philosophy that we do not fully understand. One that produces results through methods we never considered." He looked around the chamber at his fellow officers. Species that had conquered worlds through blood and terror. Empires built on the bones of countless innocents. And now they were being forced to question everything. "I am ordering a comprehensive study of human military doctrine," Vrixenal announced. "We will examine their training methods, their command structures, their rules of engagement. We will determine if there are lessons we can apply to our own forces." Admiral Vesok started to object, but stopped himself. He had seen the evidence. The Kryn had won many battles through brutality, but they had also faced endless rebellions on conquered worlds. Perhaps there was another way. As the meeting concluded, the officers filed out in small groups. Conversations continued in hushed tones. The implications of what they had learned would take time to process. Mora remained behind with Fleet Commander Vrixenal. They stood together looking at the holographic image of Earth. "Do you think they are truly as principled as they appear?" Vrixenal asked quietly. Mora considered the question. "They are imperfect. They have made mistakes. They have not always lived up to their own ideals, but they keep trying. They acknowledge their failures and work to do better. That itself is remarkable." Vrixenal nodded slowly. "We have always assumed that the strongest species would dominate the galaxy, those willing to do whatever necessary to win. But perhaps strength is not only measured in weapons and ruthlessness." "Perhaps," Mora agreed. "The humans have shown us something new, that protecting the innocent is not weakness, that restraint can be power, that the way you fight matters as much as whether you win." The two officers stood in silence for a long moment. Outside the observation chamber, the galaxy continued its endless dance of stars and empires. But something had changed. A small blue world had challenged assumptions held for millennia, and the Galactic Coalition would never see warfare the same way again. In the weeks that followed, the meeting spread through the Coalition like wildfire. Officers who had attended shared what they learned with their subordinates. Some dismissed it as impossible. Others found themselves questioning tactics they had used for centuries. Admiral Vesok returned to his homeworld troubled. He visited the memorial that honored Kryn soldiers fallen in battle. Thousands of names carved in stone, heroes of the Dominion. But for the first time, he also thought about the civilians who had died in those same conflicts. Names that were never recorded, lives that were never honored. He wondered how many of his own victories had planted seeds of future rebellion. Commander Zeleth began reviewing old military campaigns with fresh eyes. He noticed patterns he had ignored before. Planets conquered through brutality required endless garrison forces, but worlds taken through careful precision often stabilized quickly. The evidence had always been there. He had simply never looked for it. High strategist Mora continued her research into human military history. She found examples of human soldiers risking their lives to protect enemy civilians, medics treating wounded enemies, troops sharing their rations with starving populations, acts of kindness in the midst of violence. It defied everything she had been taught about the nature of war. She also discovered the concept humans called honor. Not the honor of personal combat that many species practiced, but honor in how you treated those weaker than yourself. Honor in refusing to harm the helpless. Honor in showing mercy, even when vengeance would be easier. Fleet Commander Vrixenol personally supervised the new training programs. Young officers studied human doctrine alongside their own traditional methods. At first, there was resistance. Many could not believe that holding back could be effective. But as simulations showed the long-term results, the skeptics grew quiet. The Coalition War College added new courses to their curriculum: ethics in warfare, civilian protection protocols, proportional response training. Concepts that would have been laughed at just months earlier were now taken seriously. Not everyone agreed with the changes. Conservative factions argued that softening their approach would invite attack, that predatory species would see mercy as weakness and strike without hesitation. But Mora had an answer for these concerns as well. Human doctrine did not forbid strength. It did not prevent overwhelming force when necessary. Humans had destroyed enemies who threatened innocent lives. They simply distinguished between combatants and civilians, between threats and bystanders, between necessary force and needless cruelty. This distinction was subtle but important. It meant that human militaries could be both powerful and principled. They could crush enemies who deserved destruction while protecting those who did not. The combination was more effective than pure brutality. Years passed and the changes spread. Some species adopted human doctrine more enthusiastically than others. The results varied, but a pattern emerged. Forces that protected civilians found their occupations more stable, their logistics simpler, their intelligence better, their casualties lower over time. The galaxy was changing, slowly at first, then more rapidly as successes accumulated. What had begun as one small meeting had sparked a revolution in military thinking. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, Earth continued its orbit around an ordinary star. Its people went about their lives unaware that their approach to warfare had transformed galactic civilization. They had no idea that their simple belief in protecting the innocent had made them legendary among the stars. That species who had conquered dozens of worlds now studied their methods with respect. Humanity had not won this influence through superior weapons or technology. They had won it through something far more powerful. The simple conviction that some things mattered more than victory, than how you fought defined who you were. That protecting the weak was the highest duty of the strong. The Galactic Coalition had learned something invaluable from a young species they had initially dismissed. And the lesson would echo through the cosmos for generations to come.